Before VHS static birthed Sadako, Japan already whispered about cursed calls and wells. Here's the true chill behind Hideo Nakata's Ringu, 1998, where grief, rumor, and a strip of tape turned 7 days into forever. She is Mika Tanaka, 35, a culture reporter who edits sound the way some people iron shirts, smoothing creases until memory lies flat. She takes the JR from Shinjuku with a shoulder bag full of mini DV tapes and a rental deck wrapped in a scarf to keep the old machine from rattling. The commission sounds simple on paper. The Curse of the Ring, true horror. Behind Japan's ghost movie Ringu, but the subject has weight, a film adapted from Kōji Suzuki's 1991 novel, directed by Hideo Nakata, opening in Japan on January 31, 1998, led by Nanako Matsushima as Reiko Asakawa and Hiroyuki Sanada as Ryuji Takayama. The dates are public. The chill is private. Mika tells herself the job is a walk through sources, critic clippings, production notes, old police blotters, and yet the first time she slides the battered cassette into the deck and lets static bloom, a warm, plasticky aroma rises from the machine, the precise smell of a rental store at closing time. She thinks, fear starts as a scent, then a sound, then a shape. Her plan is a chronology, what can be walked, listened to, dated. Day 1 is Tokyo, the places where late 90s video culture stored its after-hours heartbeat, stares down to basement Tsutaya outlets, the blue glow of cathode ray tubes behind steel shutters, the payphones outside where teenagers waited for a dial tone that sometimes felt like an omen. She rides the Yamanote line like a moving balcony, letting the city's vowels wash over her. In her notebook, she writes a spine for the episode: regret, memory, scent, sound, waiting, loneliness. The film's premise is clean enough to summarize in a line. Reiko, a journalist, chases a cursed videotape. The caller announces 7 days. The well waits. But Mika is after the real cartography beneath the myth, the way Ringu braided contemporary anxieties to older wells, older rooms, older silences. She lists the names she must speak carefully. Sadako Yamamura, the girl whose image crawled out of an object meant for entertainment. Shizuko, Sadako's mother, whose tragedy was mapped to an island off Tokyo's coast, and a well that could have been any well in a country where ghost stories often begin at the edge of a circle of stone. On day 2, she sails south from Takashiba to Izu-Oshima, because in the novel and in parts of the film's backstory, the island and Mount Mihara stand like a tuning fork behind the curse, a place where psychic rumor, scientific curiosity, and spectacle have crossed uncomfortably for a century. The ferry smells of diesel and salt, the wind up on deck has a taste of iron. Mount Mihara sits in the island's middle like a patiently breathing animal, its notoriety terrible and well documented. In 1933, a young woman named Kyoko Matsumoto jumped into the crater. Newspaper melodrama and voyeur tourism followed. Copycat deaths surged into the hundreds before barriers and police attention altered the ritual. Mika refuses melodrama, writing in neat block letters. Oshima is where Sadako's family story is often placed. Mihara is where grief learned to echo. She will not claim causation. She will acknowledge proximity, the way the novel's lineage places Sadako's birth on Oshima, and the way media once taught people to look at the volcano as if it were a stage. The island's air carries sulfur on its good days. On bad days, it carries silence. She walks the crater path with the restraint of someone entering a hospital ward at night. Her recorder stays in her pocket. She takes atmosphere as if it were medicine, gravel under soles, the far-off click of a shutter, a guide's voice telling a couple to stay behind the rope. A sudden draft moves across her shoulder with a scent she can't place at first, powdery, not floral, the kind that lingers in wardrobes, then disappears as quickly as sighing static. She does not turn. She writes a single line. The geology remembers what we ask it to forget. The legends are contagious because they are tidy. 7 days, a phone call, a well. But the true horror that Ringu touched and the culture recognized is harder, slower, quieter. The fear that recorded media can carry not just images but moods, that a rumor played enough times hardens into fate, that the past can dial your number even when you changed phones. Back at the inn, she opens a book and underlines Sadako as an onryō, vengeful spirit, whose well echoes older literature. In the Famicom bright light of her room, she writes Okiku in the margin, the plate-counting ghost whose story at Himeji Castle made wells into speakers long before videotape could hiss. Day 3, she rides west by Shinkansen, not to chase a production location, but to anchor the script in an older current. Himeji Castle rises white and deliberate against a rinsed sky. Tourists hold umbrellas like careful punctuation. In the courtyard, signs point discreetly to Okiku's well. No one in Mika's recording will hear the crowd. She'll dampen it in post to leave only rope creak, coin tap, water's shallow consonant. She drafts a sentence she hopes is humble enough. Before the videotape, there was a well. Before a countdown, there was counting plates. She notes that many retellings exist, kabuki plays, ukiyo-e prints, schoolbook summaries, but their shape repeats: a servant accused, a body thrown, a voice that returns at night to count from 1 to 9 and never find the 10th. If Sadako gave the global imagination an image of a woman climbing out of a screen, Okiku had already given Japan the sound of a woman climbing out of a well. The difference between water and static is method. The sameness is memory, learning to keep time. Mika leans against the stone rim, lets the damp chill the skin over her forearms, and thinks about how Ringu spliced modern appliances into this acoustic lineage. A VCR, a handset, a cathode ray tube, all instruments of waiting. Back in Tokyo on day 4, Mika chooses a smaller legend to braid into the episode the way a careful editor braids room tone into dialogue. At a primary school in Bunkyo, the janitor mops a stairwell that smells like chalk and old rain. She doesn't record here. She only listens. Taira no Hanako-san is an urban legend, but it behaves like a cousin to Sadako in the public imagination. A girl ghost in a tiled room, summoned by name, associated with doors, partitions, the liminal spaces where you wait for your body to be allowed back into the day. She writes, wells, bathrooms, phones, screens, the architecture of pauses. She will include 1, maybe 2 sentences about Hanako, careful to note the variations in origin stories, wartime air raids in some tellings, school cruelty in others, and then she will let the hallway breathe on tape for 5 seconds, longer than comfort allows. When she plays back the room later, she hears only fluorescent hum and distant sneakers, which is to say, everything. By the 5th day, she has her roster of facts, release dates, cast names, novel lineage, the island whose volcano taught newspapers to sell grief as a spectator sport, the well that taught theater to listen for counting. And she has a map of sounds: ferry diesel, Shinkansen air pressure, well water breath, the thin soprano of a payphone dial tone. For the first script page, she decides to keep dialogue as minimal as an omen. 3 lines only, each a small ice pick. Answer it. 7 days. Wait. She knows this show cannot rely on jump scare tricks. It must rely on accurately placed commas, on breaths that arrive where duty tells them to, on the audience's own archive of waiting rooms and busy signals. She opens her laptop and types the opening narration you've just heard, the one about static and whispered wells, then lets the cursor blink like a little metronome and refuses to move until the paragraph stops trembling. When it stills, she saves, dates, and adds a footnote she will read slowly in the episode. Ringu, directed by Hideo Nakata and based on Kōji Suzuki's 1991 novel, premiered in Japan on 31 January 1998, starring Nanako Matsushima, Reiko Asakawa, and Hiroyuki Sanada, Ryuji Takayama. She places the footnote sources in the show notes as if laying offerings at a household altar. Then she looks at the rental deck, at the tape still warm from its first run, and breathes through her nose until she can name what she smells: dust, ozone, plastic, and the long patience of a country that learned to hear ghosts before it saw them. Tokyo gave Mika a map that sounded like a metronome: museums, libraries, stairwells, phone halls. She started at Otago in Minato, where the NHK Museum of Broadcasting sits on a hill like a memory engine, 4 floors of radios, TV cameras, and edit decks arranged so the past can be replayed without apology. She walked past ribbon microphones and cathode ray tubes to a listening booth that looped old sign-on chimes. In her headphones, the nation's first century of broadcasting compressed into a bright, punctual jingle. She wrote, "Ringu's curse works because we already trust machines to keep time for us." When she stepped outside, Tokyo Tower's lattice cut a red geometry into winter light, a reminder that the city once built a 333-meter antenna so words and images could arrive on schedule. She filed both landmarks under Infrastructure of Waiting, the quiet architecture behind a phone that rings 7 days after you press play. If the videotape is the first instrument in Ringu, the telephone is the second. To hear an honest ring, one older than smartphones, she crossed to Musashino and signed in at the NTT History Center of Technologies, a gallery of switchboards, black bakelite handsets, and exchange racks that look like metal forests. A docent let her lift a Showa-era receiver to her ear. The dial tone arrived as a continuous velvety vowel. She clicked the cradle twice and felt the line's patience, an acoustic promise that if you stayed, someone else would too. She recorded only room tone and wrote a sentence she would keep for the script. A phone is a well you lower your voice into and wait for the surface to answer back. The exhibits confirmed what the story needed. Japan's telephone network, tended for more than a century, could plausibly carry a rumor as if it were a timetable. Back at her desk that night, she stacked facts until they felt like offerings. Ringu premiered in Japan on January 31, 1998. Hideo Nakata directed, Hiroshi Takahashi adapted Kōji Suzuki's 1991 novel, Taka Ichise produced, Toho distributed, Kenji Kawai's score wore restraint like a uniform. She typed the names the way a priest intones a litany, because accuracy is how you buy the right to tell a haunted story straight. The film's influence could be said, plainly, not breathlessly. It helped popularize the global wave called J-horror and seeded a Hollywood remake in 2002. But she wrote it as a footnote, not a headline. In the body of the script, she stayed local, grounded. A reporter hypnotized by a tape, a phone that calls like a precise afterthought, a well that holds time as if it were water. Chronology pulled her outward again. She dated a page, day 6, and sailed to Izuoshima a second time, this one to sit longer with what the island remembers. In her notebook she had already written the sentence she dreaded and therefore had to keep. Mount Mahara is where grief once learned to echo. The facts were documented in newspapers and histories. In 1933, a 21-year-old student named Kyoko Matsumoto jumped into the crater. The coverage turned tragedy into spectacle. Copycat deaths surged on the island in the months that followed, until authorities fenced the rim and posted warnings. She refused to sensationalize the numbers. She wrote them as carefully as a date of birth. The wind at the viewing platform tasted metallic. A guide's voice rose, then thinned out. Someone behind her exhaled the precise perfume of old talc. She did not turn. Static before shape, she reminded herself. The island felt less like an origin than a chord. Volcano, rumor, media, and a family name that Ringu mapped into its myth so quietly that the audience could argue forever about what was borrowed and what was invented. She wrote Day 7 at the top of a fresh page and folded in the older well that underwrites so many newer terrors. Himeji Castle stood white as a commandment. Tourists clustered near a low stone rim that signage calls Okiku's Well. She listened rather than recorded. Coin on water, Rope Creek, a child counting to 5 in a whisper before a parent's palm settled on a small wrist. She wrote the sentence the episode needed to earn. Before the videotape, there was a well. Before 7 days, there were 9 plates and a missing 10th. In the legend of Bancho Sarayashiki, Okiku counts 1 to 9 and can never find the final dish. Variations blame a jealous mistress or a predatory lord. All preserve the physics of regret. Mika would keep the names and dates light. Himeji as one staging ground, kabuki and shin kabuki adaptations in the modern era. But she would hold the sound heavy. Counting that never resolves is a curse all by itself. Because a true map needs a city's small rooms, she returned to Tokyo to eavesdrop on a different lineage. School bathrooms with their tile echo and fluorescent hum. Toire no Hanako-san, Hanako of the toilet, belongs to children and the 20th century's urban legend circuit, not to classical theater, but its rules rhyme with Ringu. A ritual summons, a door, an answer that changes the air. Some versions place Hanako during wartime air raids, others insist on bullying and solitude. Nearly all agree on the choreography. Knock 3 times on the 3rd stall and ask if she's there. Mika didn't need to record a child's dare. She only needed the hallway's long breath. 1 sentence would do in the episode. In Japan's modern folklore, even a lavatory can be a well if you wait in it correctly. Then, she would return the story to adults. Her final research day in this stretch was for iconography, a corrective for listeners who think the ghostly uniform began with Sadako's hair. In a quiet hour, she scanned books and reputable summaries, and typed a short explanation she could say in under 20 seconds. Yurei in Edo period prints and kabuki settle into a recognizable costume. White burial kimono, sometimes a small white forehead triangle, long black hair let down from funeral rites, hands lax at the wrists, feet often omitted so the figure seems to drift. The point wasn't taxonomy, it was inheritance. Ringu did not invent how terror looks, it placed that look inside appliances we trusted. She underlined placed twice. Only 2 scraps of dialogue made it into her draft today, both slender, both necessary. At the NHK Museum, she let a recorded announcer say the first, clipped into a room tone gap, "We now begin, because every curse begins with consent." On Oshima, with her hand on the safety rail above Mihara's crater, she allowed herself a whisper that the microphone would not keep. "I hear you." Then she got on the ferry, let diesel and salt sand down the edges of the day, and wrote the transition she'd use to pull listeners from research into the first proper haunting. Press play, answer the phone, walk to the well. The rest is the work of waiting. Next, she would go looking for rooms in Tokyo where tapes still sit on neglected shelves, where the plastic smells like a rental store at closing time, and where a television's glass remembers the shape of a face. Day 8 began under Nakano's fluorescent skies. Mika stepped into Nakano Broadway, the 1966 concrete hive that once dreamed of luxury and now thrums with subculture, mandarake floors, vitrines of videotapes with sunburned spines, glass cases that smell like dust warmed by lights. She walked the narrow aisles as if reading a diary left open, cracked clamshells of home-use-only tapes, handwritten spine labels, a VCR whose eject squeal sounded like a swallowed cry. Broadway changed its clientele, but not its bones. It's still the same megastructure that opened in the Showa boom, now famous for niche media and otaku treasures. She bought nothing there. Instead, she took the Chuo line one stop further and hunted where old machines go to wait, a hard-off. The chain is common enough to feel like infrastructure, reused stores that buy what others have finished with, stereos, tape decks, cathode TVs, VCRs with cigarette-yellowed remotes. A clerk in blue gloves slid a JVC deck across bubble wrap, then a small 14-inch CRT, its screen grayed by storage. Hardoff sells these things by the shelf, and in Akihabara, its branches stack them like an archive someone forgot to catalog. The store's air was a cologne of plastic, ozone, and old lacquer. The cash drawer chimed a note that belonged in a museum. She carried the lot back to her business hotel as if she were moving a sleeping animal. The room filled with 1998 the moment the CRT warmed. Snow burst across glass. A steady, patient hiss claimed the walls. She threaded her field cassette, the one a collector in Nakano had copied decades ago from something he refused to name, and let it run without watching. The smell of warmed plastic rose like a memory of a rental counter at closing time. On the desk, her phone lay face down, muted. She wanted the room to be honest. If a phone would ring in a story like this, it would be the old kind. So she pulled on her coat, took the elevator down, and walked 2 blocks to a green payphone. Japan keeps these alive on purpose. NTT's network keeps public telephones for emergencies, a habit reinforced in earthquakes when mobiles choke and the old booths do the quiet hero's work. She lifted the receiver. The dial tone arrived, velvety and continuous, the kind of vowel you could pour a confession into. She didn't feed coins. She only listened until the tone became a room of its own. Then, she whispered one syllable the tape would not keep. Wait. Back upstairs, she ran the tape again with the TV off, taking sound only. The deck's capstan made a low, healthy burr. The spools tightened and slackened the way a body breathes when it's listening for footsteps. At the 5-minute mark, the hotel's ventilation ticked, and in that tiny pause, Mika smelled something she couldn't file under dust, powdery, wardrobe cool, the same note she'd met at Mihara's rail. She wrote, static before shape, scent before sight. She let the cassette end and did nothing for a full minute except name what she heard, the room's hush, an elevator's cable hymn, the formless courage of a city sleeping. Day 9, she paid a debt the story owed. In Yotsuya, down alleys that feel borrowed from another century, Oiwa Inari Tamiya Shrine sits small and stubborn. The tale of Yotsuya Kaiden, Oiwa and Iemen, betrayal and a returning woman, hovers here like old incense, and tradition says actors and directors visit to pay respects before staging the ghost play, as if to borrow permission. Mika left no microphone on the offering box. She only stood in the cold and listened to the thin bell note proceed into stillness. She wrote one factual sentence for the script. Artists still come here before they touch Oiwa's story, and one that wasn't fact so much as an ethics. Pay attention before you record. Tokyo rewarded her restraint by giving her one more machine to interview. In Musashino, the NTT History Center of Technologies keeps switchboards and black bakelite handsets like a forest of asleep trees. A docent showed her a Showa-era receiver. She pressed it to her ear and met the same dial tone as last night, like meeting a relative in better light. A museum that preserves telephones is really a museum of waiting, ringing, answering, silence. She would use just a single sentence from this visit in the episode. A phone is a well you lower your voice into. Then she left, because rooms like this don't give more than you ask. That evening she hauled the CRT to a friend's studio near Koenji, a quiet room with foam on its scars and cables disciplined into braids. They set the television on a rolling cart, fed the deck through a capture box, and watched snow bloom across glass like breath on a mirror. No phantoms arrived, no hair crossed the bezel. Instead, the room taught patience. On the soundtrack she heard what she'd been working toward since Atago and Oshima and Himeji, the grammar of pauses. The tape hiss became the escalator's slow E from another life. The dial tone became a corridor in Queen Mary's twin somewhere far away. The shrine bell became the count that never reaches 10. She spoke 3 lines into a handheld, each short enough to pass unnoticed by any superstition listening. Answer it. 7 days. Wait. Then she powered the TV down and let the dark give her back her own face. Tomorrow she would write the close. A return to the well as metaphor and hardware. A respectful footnote to the dates. Ringu's 1998 debut, a novel from 1991, a volcano that taught newspapers the cost of spectacle, and an accounting of what the living are asked to do with rumor. For now, she left the VCR open so the room could breathe the way a booth breathes between callers. The cassette's warm plastic scent thinned into ordinary air. Somewhere, the city dialed a number just to test whether anyone still answered. She let it ring. Then she let it go. Day 10 began with the work that never makes it into legends. Labeling files, cutting room tone, checking dates until the facts clicked into place like VHS spools engaging their hubs. Mika decided the episode would end the way Ringu begins, with timing. She built the final sequence as a staircase, the NHK Broadcasting Museum's sign-on chime as the first step, the old NTT dial tone as the second, and the soft hiss of a CRT warming as the third. On the fourth step, she placed one sentence that paid for the entire haunting. Press play, answer the phone, walk to the well. The rest of the page she left blank, knowing silence is not an absence but a tool she must wield as carefully as any date. NHK Broadcasting Museum, Atago Minato, opened 1956, the world's first museum dedicated to broadcasting. She wrote a footnote the way priests lay offerings. Hideo Nakata's Ringu, 1998, Toho distribution. Adapted by Hiroshi Takahashi from Kōji Suzuki's 1991 novel. Cast: Nanako Matsushima, Hiroyuki Sanada. Score by Kenji Kawai. Japanese release January 31, 1998. She placed it under the outro like an anchor in quiet water, not because listeners need every credit in their ears, but because accuracy buys permission to speak softly about fear. When she hit play on the rough cut, the facts held where they belonged and the room tone did its unshowy job, a platform for memory. Day 11. She fact-checked the island that changed the country's weather of talk. The Mihara chapter got 3 sentences and no flourish. A 21-year-old student named Kyoko Matsumoto jumped into the crater on February 12, 1933. Press melodrama followed. A surge in copycat deaths forced authorities to fence the rim and police the rituals of approach. She refused numbers that bent toward sensation, letting 2 trustworthy summaries hold the weight, an academic account that foregrounds the case's same-sex panic, and a historical digest that records the state's response. The script said only what it could carry. Grief echoed here, policy answered. Then it moved on. Because her story insisted on Wells' that talk, she threaded in the older voice that makes Ringu legible even to people who have never owned a VCR. In the mix, Coin on Water from Himeji sat exactly where a heart would expect it, after the dial tone, before the CRT snow, so that a listener could feel the lineage without being told. The sentence she kept was simple. Before the videotape, there was a well. Before 7 days, there were 9 plates and a missing 10th. She footnoted the legend's Himeji variant and made sure the castle's official materials sat in the show notes beside a compact encyclopedic summary, no single retelling crowned as definitive, the way folklore prefers it. Day 12 asked for courtesy. She walked back to Yotsuya's Oiwa Inari Tamiya shrine with an unpowered recorder in her pocket, because some rooms give you more when you decline to take. A small bell note folded into cold air, a leaf skated across stone, nothing else volunteered. The script kept 1 line only. Actors and directors still visit before staging Yotsuya Kaiden, as if to borrow permission. Then, in a lower register, meant more for herself than for listeners. Pay attention before you record. That was as close to devotion as a reporter should write. The penultimate day was for phones, the green booths that survive because the country asks them to. She recorded no conversations, only the infrastructure, the hush inside a box on a windy corner, the velvety vowel of a Showa-era dial tone in a museum handset, a note in the show notes that, in disasters, NTT still deploys emergency public phones, and a 171 voice service so families can leave and retrieve messages when mobiles falter. She wrote a sentence that sounded like a vow. A phone is a well you lower your voice into and wait for the surface to answer back. When fatigue demanded a simpler task, she folded Tokyo's afterlives of plastic into one clean paragraph. Nakano Broadway, the 1966 Showa megastructure turned subculture hive. Mandarok's multi-floor empire of nostalgia, Hardoff's reuse aisles where old VCRs breathe out warm plastic memory, Akihabara branches stacking CRTs like a catalog of vanished rooms. She used them as texture, not thesis, the city's living archive of machines that teach waiting, and gave each a quiet, verifiable breadcrumb in the notes. At last, the cut ran from first static to final well, with no gaps except those she placed on purpose. She allowed 3 lines of dialogue, the same 3 that had paced her notebook since day one. In the museum's chime gap, answer it. Under the dial tone, 7 days. On the last step, where water breathes like tape hiss, wait. They were not a conversation so much as a contract, simple, clean, enforceable by memory alone. The premiere was small on purpose, a late-night drop, a quiet tweet, a page whose show notes were crowded with dates and addresses like offerings laid at a household altar. In the headphones, the episode's last minute opened the room to the listener and left them there. NHK's chime decaying into the old phone's infinite vowel, which in turn softened into CRT snow, which slid into coin on water, which vanished into the well's unshowy breath. Then, nothing. Long enough to count to 9. The credits were an ordinary voice saying the extraordinary softly, Ringu, directed by Hideo Nakata, Toho, John 31, 1998, adapted from Kōji Suzuki's 1991 novel, Music by Kenji Kawai. A link below pointed to the museum on Otago, the phone center in Musashino, the castle that keeps a name for a well, the shrine that accepts actors' courtesy, the island that learned to fence grief. None of it sensational, all of it exact. After she published, the room didn't change, but the room did seem to hear itself more carefully. On her desk, the JVC deck clicked like a polite bow and went still. She turned the CRT face down so its glass couldn't hold a shape. She unplugged the capture box and coiled the cables into quiet. She let the green booth on the corner keep its late-night vigil for earthquakes that might never come. She packed her bag to travel again, because a good haunting doesn't pin you to a chair. It teaches you to keep appointments with memory in whatever city you stand. The last thing she wrote in the notebook was not a line for broadcast, but a line for later. Regret, memory, scent, sound, waiting, loneliness. None of them want spectacles. All of them want witnesses. She closed the cover, and the room exhaled. Somewhere in the building a landline rang once, then thought better of it. The air held still as a phone booth. She allowed herself one more line, soft enough that the tape would never catch it. I'm here. The city answered the way cities do, through its machines. A museum chime remembered how to begin. A public phone remembered how to hold a voice. A CRT remembered how to glow. A well remembered how to say nothing at all. And in that patient nothing, the true horror behind Ringu became a kindness. Not that a curse hunts the living, but that the living have learned, over 100 years of radios and wires and screens and stories, how to keep faith with the pauses that hold us together.